was light. Yeah, exactly. That's a thing. Like when we have guests, we all do it. And if it's always a competition. If someone does
you lost.
I did lose. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's another Live Cure or Die podcast without Kevin. He's been leaving me hanging. He's disappeared. He's in the bush somewhere. He's with the pygmies right now, I think. But
getting everybody jealous.
That's right. Yeah. And we're going to keep the train rolling and bring on guests and have fun without him. So he's missing out. But if you want to do a little intro on yourself, it'll be better than anything I've got. So
Sure. My name is Doug Patteson, and I'm a former CIA officer. A lot of folks know me on Instagram as Texas Spy Dad. And I do a bunch of film on TV work, helping make shows a little bit better, a little bit more authentic, that sort of stuff.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I think I was introduced to your page. Probably by the Field Ethos guys. We were both friends with them, and maybe the Watches of Espionage dude
could have been
him. But yeah, I saw all the stuff and I was like, and then I have a couple buddies that were either in or around the agency, and I was like, it'd be cool. I just recently remembered, oh yeah, you're local.
Yeah.
And I'd been interested in your content for a while, and I was like, he's right down here. And then I think Jason said you were teaching a class at UNH or
That's
classes
right.
at UNH. And I was
That's
like, he's right down the street. We got to get him here. So,
well, and it's fun. When I work at home, I sit in my home office and I get to listen to the sounds of freedom from your range over at my house. So,
okay.
And then I immediately go on Facebook and look at everybody complaining about it.
Yeah.
And then I, send notes to Kevin saying, hey, grannies are upset. So,
yeah. There are people, there's a lady that's very upset about that range being there. So
I know.
That's awesome.
But hey, it is the live free or die state.
Allegedly. I don't know. I'm from Maine, so I don't know. Right on. Well, so we just did a build. We did a gun build. I know I'm sure you were obviously familiar with Q before, but not super in depth.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you saw that you were like, oh, this is not like the guns that I'd seen before?
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff so I grew up around hunting rifles. When I went into the agency, got exposed to a bunch of different other, rifles. And then have been, playing with ARs and that sort of stuff for a while now, but I'd never done anything like this. Never seen a rifle with some of these features like the 45 degree bolt throw.
Yeah.
And then particularly the interchangeability of the barrels was really cool. And to learn how you can do that and how you guys designed it for that. And then again, the tapered,
the muzzle
for the, for suppressor, use. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, Nick Schaefer, kind of the lead designer on this, was out there and talking about it a little bit, but yeah, it all just kind of stemmed from, because those guys are not aesthetics guys.
Right.
At all. Granted, it looks cool, but that's because we had an industrial designer that kind of took what they did and made it look cool. But yeah, their whole ethos on it, or the kind of the impetus of the rifle, was take the minimum amount of material for each thing and put it together and make it work. And that's why you get that light rifle it's compact. You fold it up. Actually, Nick didn't want to do a folding stock. We've talked about it before, but he had never seen one done properly. And then you and I just talked about that wedge lock, where over time it's going to wear into itself. So it's only going to get more sturdy, essentially. You won't see it wobble around. And those guys they thought of quite literally everything. And if you think they didn't and you ask them, they thought about it.
It's interesting thinking about the idea of, in this case, a fix, which, a hunting platform to have a folding stock, because you've just always thought you needed that permanent stock in order to get, good cheek weld, good accuracy, et cetera. Yeah. And so I'm really excited to be able to take it out and shoot it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll feel real familiar to any platforms you've used in the past, especially in the AR world, because you have those AR ergonomics. So for a lot of people that are getting into hunting that may have grown up as gun guys, AR guys, this and that, it's not a hard transition to get into that.
Well, and I love that every one of them's built suppressor ready as well, right?
Yeah.
So many folks are moving into using some suppressors for either sport shooting or for hunting. And so it's really kind of cool to just not have to worry about ruining a traditional Model 70 barrel to get it threaded.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And we're glad that you get to build one, kind of see how the show goes here and meet the engineers that did them and do all that. So
yeah, it was awesome. Now I need to get good glass for it.
That's right. We have plenty of suggestions for sure.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and we probably have some here that you can take a look at too. Feel the weight and stuff, because that's another thing. Is everyone always asks us, what do I put on it? It's like, well, do you care if it's heavy? Do you want it to be light? It's the world is yours. But So I guess some background stuff. Have you done anything with Field Ethos? Have you done any articles with them?
Yeah, I've done probably 7 articles for Field Ethos.
Yeah.
The most recent issue, which just came out in the mail last week,
I was gonna say recently,
has one of my pieces in it about catching a pelican by accident.
Okay,
which is a pretty hilarious story. So if folks that have read it may have read it online, but it's in the hard copy magazine too.
Awesome. I haven't received mine. Thanks, Jason Vincent.
That's all right. Well, we know who gets them
that's
first.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
No, they're good guys. I've been really happy to do some writing with them and to get to know others in their community of writers and adventurers, because it really is, as they say in the magazine, it's more of a lifestyle than it is just focused on hunting or fishing.
I think it's such a cool idea too that, one, I love print in general. Like I'd rather read books and do whatever, but I think it's awesome that it gives the everyday person who may not even consider themselves a writer or have aspirations to be a writer, it gives them the opportunity to be a writer. You write your story and then they pair you up with an editor who just makes it a little more palatable, and you see your own thing in print. And I think that's really cool. And it's not like an exclusive thing. Everyone is allowed to send in their article, and if it doesn't make print, maybe it goes on the website or who knows. Right. And I think what they're doing is a really cool thing. And we partner with them. We have a gun. We did a gun before, a 308 with them. It was the M81, the little woodland camo one in there.
Yep.
And then we'll have another one eventually. We're working on it right now, but those are super good dudes.
Is that a spoiler?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I guess it is. It's going to be different than we've done before as far as how we, instead of just doing like a drop, like, hey, you get it. I think we're going to
do a pre-order.
No, I think we're going to have it available for an extended amount of time, just in stock. It's a cool one. It looks cool. Nothing super crazy different about it, but it's very cool.
Yeah.
But it'll be exciting.
It's fun working with those guys. They're what I also like about the way they do the Outrider stuff, as well as the magazine and the website, is the focus on excellence.
Yes,
is really good, but they're not breaking people's banks necessarily either.
Yeah. Granted, I love the Outrider stuff. Like I talk to Tony all the time, and he's like, "Oh, come on this trip. It's this." I'm like, "Brother, I don't think you know how much I make. Like, I cannot go do that in this faraway land I've never heard of." But in reality, if you were to compare those trips to what they would be if you just booked them on your own,
right,
you're getting a fraction of the cost,
or you'll get a better trip at the same cost for what you might do.
Absolutely.
And I know they've got one slot left on an elk hunt, this muzzleloader elk hunt coming up. That's like $17,000.
Whew.
Okay, so that's a little rich for my blood,
right?
But they've got some other stuff that's actually really pretty good deals, and those guys make sure it's an excellent trip.
Yeah. Tony asked me to host a fly fishing trip for bonefish, and I looked at the price where we're going and everything. I'm like, that's not a bad deal, realistically, especially for what you're getting. Do I want to pay it? No, but
you don't have to.
That's right. I'm the host.
When you're the host,
Jay from Q. So I think what most people, obviously, as soon as you say you spent your time in the agency, I think everyone's gonna want to dive into it, but to an extent. But were you mill before? How did that even come up? And I know obviously you don't have to get into the depths of recruiting or this or that or join it, but how did that even become into your world? Are you local? Are you from here originally? Are you from Texas originally?
Yeah, so I'm from Texas originally. I was at the University of Texas, and I was just a kind of a typical frat bro in college that didn't have a clue what I wanted to do.
Great.
And just through happenstance ran into a CI recruiter who told me that I wasn't qualified, but that he would connect me with somebody anyway. And that started my process. And of course, I was pretty determined to make sure that I got in when he told me I couldn't. So,
right, of course,
ended up getting in and becoming a case officer, which in our parlance is the guys and gals that go out and recruit and run spies. Okay. So we go out and chase bad guys or convince people to do things for us or get them to stop doing things against us.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think everyone has this perception. There are multiple perceptions of the agency, whether it be what you see as far as, I'm trying to think of like your Jason Bourne side of things. And then you also have, there are people that just don't know. They have no idea what the agency's about. What are you able to discuss? Like, what is the main mission of the Central Intelligence Agency?
Yeah, that's easy. Like, so as you noted earlier, I teach at the University of New Hampshire. And so one of the reasons I decided to start teaching there was in order to kind of demystify a little bit of that world for students so that people who might be interested in going into it would have more access to information about it. So I teach issues, or teach a course on issues and intelligence collection, et cetera. And one of the first things we talk about is, the CIA's got two primary roles: collection of foreign intelligence and then analysis of that information and providing it to President, Department of State, Congress, the policymakers for better decision making. Really, the president first and foremost.
Right.
So you go steal secrets, and then you figure out what they mean and tell the president what they mean, so that the president can then make the decisions that he needs to make for our nation. That's the core.
It's hard to beat that, I suppose.
Yeah. Since 9/11, you've seen the covert action side really kind of boom as we went out and did a lot more of kind of direct action, kinetic type work. But that's not the core mission of the agency.
Right.
It is, however, a mission that's reserved for the agency based on the way it was set up and laws in the U.S., et cetera.
Yeah. And I think a point that we've kind of talked about on or offline was, I think there are a lot of people that they look at, or what their idea of the agency or what an agent is generally someone that is not, it's whether it be a GRS guy or like these direct action guys. And a lot of times those are not, they're contractors, or they're not what you were. They're not like, they didn't go through the same pipeline that you went through.
Right.
And I think that's something that gets misconstrued a lot. When did you said you were at University of Texas, when did you get into or start your process of getting into the agency?
I started it my last semester in school.
Yeah.
So at a career fair on campus, they actually were there recruiting people for analyst roles, for scientist roles, et cetera. So I went and talked to a recruiter. The role I was recruiting or, trying to get was a clandestine role, an undercover role. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, yeah, you can't do that through me, but here, go meet this guy and start the process, a separate way. So that's when it started. It took almost, I'd say, 10 months.
Oh, wow.
Of interviews and polygraphs and medical exams and so on, psychological exams, before ultimately getting through and getting the job offer and then going to start.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems different. And maybe you had a different experience. This was pre 9/11.
This was pre 9/11. So now everybody starts online for the most part. I mean, there are still career fairs, and the intelligence community, NSA, CIA, DIA, they all send recruiters to many of the campuses at career fairs, mostly to talk to students about what and why, and then they point folks back to the websites now primarily as starting their application process.
And so, but I guess in your process, you were aware of what you were signing up to do, and you kind of had a goal of what you're trying to reach. Oh, okay.
I did not know what a case officer was until that guy told me.
Yeah.
And he said he was coming at it from, he definitely had a bias towards kind of the analytical mindset. And he said, in his world, the analysts were the cream of the crop. They're the ones that are delivering the news to the president and, helping him with decision making. And the collectors, the case officers, were the knuckle draggers.
Right. Yeah.
They're just, he goes, so case officers spend all their time overseas. They meet sleazy people in sleazier places. They're out all at night. They never see time at a headquarters, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that
sounds great.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm doing that anyway.
I don't want to sit in a cube.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what set me on that path. But there was not nearly as much information then as there is now about what a case officer does. And, there've been a bunch of books that have been written. Doug London's book, The Recruiter, is a great book talking about kind of life as a human collector, human intelligence, collector out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Granted, the couple of people that I know that work amongst or around the agency, specifically a gentleman that worked within, basically he applied for a government job or was reached out to by the government, and from my understanding, he wasn't 100% sure that it was for the agency until a bit of the way through the process. He just thought, it's going to be a DoD or DoD job or whatever, and then to a certain extent, and that might have been like a post 9/11 type thing, keeping it a little more under wraps or whatever. But it seems to be a little different. Like at least you were going. I want to go in the agency.
Yes. I knew for sure I was trying to get into the agency, and I knew that by midway through the process, or fairly early on in the process, I wanted to be a case officer. I still didn't really know how case officers did their jobs. Yeah. pre 9/11, your only news on it was things like the Jason Bourne books or, James Bond movies, figuring what that sort of stuff was like.
So once you went through that pipeline, was there sort of, did you have like a baptism by fire type that where you just dropped into it, or was it something that you kind of worked into? I imagine the pipeline is pretty in depth.
The pipeline was pretty in depth. We had really, really good training. It for us at the time I went through, it was a little bit over a year long pipeline. And they teach you all of the basic skills that you need to go out and go overseas and, spot, assess, develop, recruit, and run sources.
Yeah.
But really the on-the-job training that takes place when you get overseas and into your first role is you get other people's assets that they've already recruited and you start running those. And that's kind of how you learn what it's really like to do it on the street.
Yeah.
And so you go out and you get that basic experience of collecting intelligence from people that are already kind of on the books. Yeah. That helps.
Now, I had no experience doing so, of course, but I try to relate it to, is it similar? So like in the military, you go through your technical training after your basic training, whatever. And at least for me, I go through tech school, whatever. And then when I get to my unit, essentially it's like, hey, everything you learn in tech school, don't do that. Like, yes, it's a good foundation, but here's how we're really going to do things. Is it similar to that where you get to your first assignment and you're like, okay, I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, and you're just completely, or was it an easier transition into that?
It's a mix of both, actually. You get there, and because now you're overseas, you're no longer stateside in training scenarios, everything is different for real, right? Yeah. So how the traffic works on the street, what is the host country's capabilities? Is it a friendly assignment? Is it a hostile assignment? Is it a service that's actively working against us? All of that kind of goes into play, and it's difficult to replicate that in the training environment. But the principles remain the same, right? You're, making sure you know the skill sets you need to know to keep your people safe remain the same. And your interpersonal relationships with humans remain the same. The only difference is now if I'm trying to recruit somebody, that person, they may not know I'm trying to recruit them. Whereas if I'm in that training environment, the person I'm engaging with, like they're a role player.
Of course, yeah.
And so, you take into account that this person's motivations for this, it's now real. Mm. Like I don't have to just get through this training exercise.
Right.
I've now really got to understand this person well enough to get them to do what I need them to do.
Yeah. Do you find that it came to you naturally, or was it 100% like a learning curve through the training?
Yeah, I think you'll find a lot of our answers to almost any question are it depends. Right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But same with guns.
I think for me, it came fairly naturally, and then the training and the experience builds upon that.
Right.
Right. And so, if you're good with people and you're others focused and you're good at making connections with people and understanding their motivations, then that's going to facilitate that. If you're very self-centered and if you make it all about yourself, it's going to make it very challenging. Now, there are people on both sides of that can do it well or poorly. They can overcome, or hurt themselves as the case may be. But I think generally speaking, if you're pretty good with people, you can, have a strong foundation for this and then go in and do it. Language skills matter a lot too.
Okay. Is that another thing where, we learn a lot, military guys, we've had a lot of special operations guys on, that in their pipeline, they have to go to a language school. Is that something similar? Were you sent to a language school, or do you get to pick a language, or is it kind of just hey, here you go?
Yeah. So I had 3 different overseas tours, very, very different types of tours. The very first tour was in a high threat post with a heavy CT counterterrorism focus. Mm-hmm. The second tour was what we would generally refer to as a denied area tour. It was a country very hostile to us, with a service that was hostile to us. And so you had to operate very differently. And then the third was like a very benign operating environment in a major capital city where everybody in the world was there, but there was no inherent threats in that environment. Of those 3 tours, all of which were in non-English speaking countries, I only got language training for one of them. I only needed language training really for one of them.
Right.
One of the tours had English was pretty good among a lot of the population, and I went in with Spanish anyway, and Spanish covered a lot of the population. The second tour absolutely had to have the native language for that country, and that was a year-long program just by itself. Yeah. 5 days a week, language training. And then the third assignment, I did not get language, and the targets I was working were not in that host country language. So the language would have helped me getting around the country,
Right.
but it wouldn't necessarily have helped me in the work.
Okay. Yeah. That's super interesting. And I'm sure there are cases where, or maybe not, where say you have 3 different tours and they're giving you language for each tour. I would only assume that happens, but probably less than.
No, there are. I mean, so language is expensive, right? So
of course,
like anybody, military, commercial, intelligence, they want to make sure they're getting the best bang for their buck, right? And so they've already spent a lot of money getting you through the initial pipeline to go on some of these other tours where the host service is a very aggressive anti-U.S. host service. You go through maybe another significant series of training, kind of a grad school for spies. And then language training can be very expensive, right? So when I went through my language training, it was 2 students, 1 instructor for a year, 5 days a week. And only one of us was going to go on our assignment.
Oh, okay.
Right. And
is that purpose driven where it's put 2 people we know they're going to compete with each other?
It was unclear to me at the time, and remains unclear whether that was intentional or just at the end of the day they decided to only send 1 officer. Right. But they had, both of us spent the whole time learning the language, and only one of us ended up getting selected for the assignment.
That's interesting.
Now, I think I had 2 advantages in that particular moment. One of which was I did better in the language than the other individual, just barely. But I also had a wife. My wife was also an agency officer, so they were going to end up getting a 2-for-1 and sending us on this post that they wouldn't have necessarily gotten with the other officer.
Now, is that something that's common? Couples, I would say, not necessarily dating, but like husband, wife, is that common within the agency? A lot of
it's pretty common. Think about it. It's very hard to meet people when you're in a job where you have to lie about what you do.
Of course, yeah.
So, I mean, you can do it, but it kind of undermines trust pretty significantly. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of dating inside the pool, so to speak, because you don't have to worry about that. They already know where you work, et cetera. And so that does end up happening a lot. And then sometimes you'll marry, like I did, marry somebody from outside who then gets overseas, and then there's an opportunity for them to start working for us. And then they join. And so that's actually what she did.
Okay, that's very cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
It was a
thing. So you recruited your wife as well.
I recruited my wife as well, yes. And she ended up being a very gifted officer in a different role than I had.
Yeah, that was something I was curious about. Is it a no-go to have you do the same role, or it depends?
It depends. It would have been fine to do the same role. However, so the role I had was not a role that you could get hired into from overseas. It was a role you had to get hired into in the States. She ended up becoming basically what's now looked at as a targeter.
Okay.
And so before they had that term. And so she was able to kind of get drawn in that way overseas and start working on the CT target from the very beginning.
Interesting. And is that something that on her side, was that something that she had ever been interested in before meeting you?
It was not something she'd ever been interested in, thought about, anything like that, but she turned out to be really gifted and skilled at it. And so found it to be a very compelling and rewarding job to do.
That's awesome. That's super cool. I guess one thing I was curious about, like kind of going back to that start, you make it through the pipeline, you're as best you can, you're like, I got it squared away.
Yeah.
Is there any moment that you had maybe on that first tour that you did that after it was all said and you went through this and after it was all said and you're like, I did not expect it to be like that? Is there anything that kind of, I guess I'm sure there's been a million times where you've been shocked, I suppose, but was there any pivotal moment where you're like, whoa, this is not what I thought this was going to be?
No, I think any of those moments like you described there, I think are connected to just dealing with the bureaucracy of, the intelligence community, and that world at large. In terms of the engagement with people on the street or, scary engagements or whatever, all of those turned out to be, kind of as I would have expected them to do.
Yeah.
I did regularly, suffer from imposter syndrome, where I'd be like, I can't believe I'm still getting paid to do this. When are they going to figure out that I don't have a clue what I'm doing? Right. And it sort of didn't matter because you learned as you went along. You were honest about your failures, learning and building successes. And that kind of just kept you on the right path.
Post 9/11 has, and I mean, anyone that's watching, I'm sure they've seen X amount of agency films or whatever, and I think Zero Dark 30 does from a civilian's point of view. It's like, oh, that seems reasonable. Like that seems like, because it wasn't focused on the DA side of things. It was focused on the gathering of intelligence and all that. And I guess, did you ever have any times where you were working with a person or a contact or whoever, and you were 100% sure, okay, I'm getting across, and it turns out either not that they were playing you, but they were working both sides of things? Is it as common as you kind of hear in the tales, like, oh, we can't trust it? Like, obviously you can't trust anyone, but do our guys get, I guess,
fooled?
Tricked more often than not? Yeah.
I don't think more often than not, but it's absolutely something that happens.
Yeah.
Or more regularly, the person you're engaging with has an agenda all of their own. Mm-hmm. So they may understand what you're trying to do. They may not be trying to trick you per se into, coming to their side, but they may be trying to work an angle.
Yeah.
Right. And so they may be trying to give you as little as they possibly can in order to get maximum leverage or benefit for themselves. And so understanding people's motivations and why they're there, it becomes so critically important in it.
Right.
But generally speaking, you learn to figure out people out, learn to read them pretty well, pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things you get pushed on from your supervisors is, look, is this making progress or not? Like, and how are you demonstrating the progress? And if it's not making progress, then they're like, cut bait. Wow. You don't have time.
Yeah.
And you may only be in this assignment for 2, 3, or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And, you're trying to take somebody from zero to committing treason
right.
in a fairly fast time frame.
Yeah.
And you only have a limited number of days, hours, et cetera, to do this. And so you better pick your targets wisely. It
is so interesting that basically you have a human being that has felt a certain way for 20, 30 years. And in like you said, a small time frame, whether it be months or a couple of years, get them to completely, essentially just believe that what you're like, I need to do a very dangerous thing, but it's going to have a very positive outcome for me. And whether that's true or not, you're convincing them to believe that. And I think that's the most, from my side, like the human side is super interesting to me in the sense that I'm always so curious if it is similar to like what we deal with in the gun world, where it's like, for guns, the best guys in the world, like the tier 1 guys, are experts at the fundamentals. Yeah. The flashy stuff just happens naturally, but they're pros at the fundamentals. And I'm always curious if the human side, if it's like, because I've heard it described as like we just said, you're taking someone that's believed this their whole lives, and in a short period of time, you get them to completely, I guess, like give up their values or swap their beliefs. And to me, that's very flashy. It's very like, oh, pro, this sneaky, whatever. But I'm curious, does it come down to those fundamentals? There's a few fundamental things that you learn, and that's what carries you. So
I guess I would push back on that presumption that you're getting them to totally switch 180 in a short time frame. I think really what you're doing is you're finding the people that have access to the information you need that probably may not know yet that they've been thinking a certain way for a long time. Right. In fact, there's a thought that we say or said about working with the Russians, that many of the best assets recruited against Russia actually volunteered themselves. They came to us before we even knew that they were interested. Yeah. And because they were already frustrated with their internal system, they were motivated to work against it. So we talk the common motivation, whatever mnemonic we would use is MICE, right? So money, ideology, coercion, and ego, MICE. And in reality, I would say that ideology is often the strongest of the motivators, because that's an internal motivation, right? An intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. And so I think finding people that are self-motivated is going to kind of facilitate that process rapidly. So if they have access and they're self-motivated, then I think it's doable. I think it's almost impossible to take somebody who fundamentally disagrees with everything you stand for and convince them. Right. Like that's a tough sales job. and to do that in any reasonable time frame, lacking some other triggering event. So that's the other thing that might happen is you might have a terrorist who is fully aligned with AQ's morals, structure, whatever, but put them in a situation where there's some external force that works against them. They have a family member that's killed by somebody in their system, or whatever. Then you may be able to leverage that into shifting that needle pretty rapidly. But otherwise, taking a hardcore terrorist and going from 0 to 60 just because you're a nice guy,
right? Yeah,
it just doesn't happen.
Yeah,
right. And so, but taking that hardcore terrorist is like, man, this my reading of the Quran does not map to the actions that we're doing. Yeah, then that person's got an internal motivation that you might be able to.
And they may not realize like, oh, I don't actually agree with this, but that questioning at least, So
I think it's not wholesale taking somebody and swapping them 180.
Right. I mean, essentially all you need if they have 15 beliefs or whatever, all you need is to get them to second guess one of them. Right. And then that's your
your hook.
Yeah. So how long have you been out, or if that's even
No, I've been out. I mean, since 9/11, so I've been out a long time now.
Okay, I was just going to say I was curious if you worked.
It's a crappy job for families. It's difficult for families, and so after we had our second child, we made the decision to pop smoke and move off into the private sector. Yeah, and have been doing that ever since.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was curious initially between if you were working. As far as the public knows, our primary adversaries being Taliban, AQ,
sure,
and then eventually, obviously, ISIS. Is that something that you're still? I mean, obviously, you're teaching courses at the collegiate level. Are you still? Is it something that you still find yourself constantly thinking about? Like my example being like ISIS for me was super interesting. The development of ISIS, and basically, from my understanding, essentially it was Fedayeen fighters that while they were locked up, were just like, hey, we're going to brew this whole other thing.
Right.
Do you ever find yourself looking at the next step? Like, do you ever projecting in the future of like, hey, this is the current situation that we're in. And I think a lot of people focus on that, but do you find yourself looking at like, hey, this could develop into this or this, whatever. Is that something that you do naturally, or is it something that you, include in your teaching? I think
it's it depends. So the courses I teach rotate periodically. So right now I'm prepping for a course in the fall that's about covert action. Mm-hmm. So I'm spending a lot of time in history right now, looking back at the U.S. involvement. Well, starting with OSS, but then really looking at like Chile in 1960 and 1970, all the way up to the Bin Laden operation. And it's interesting because one of the things I have to do as a former is I have to get all of that material cleared by the agency,
of course,
for public release to ensure there's no classified information in it. And that's a challenging thing to do sometimes because a lot of the information that may be publicly available in some respects can still contain classified information, and I'm not allowed to use it.
Right.
So, for example, when I taught a class on counterintelligence, I wanted to use some of the stuff from Snowden. But I can't use any of the WikiLeaks information because technically it's all still classified information. Yet if you were a professor,
I could go. Yeah,
you could go get it and use it and teach it. So there's some interesting challenges in there. But so I do think about it because I want to think about, are there things our students should be learning from the past to look forward to the future, right? And I think it's for me one of the really interesting examples has been watching how our focus on the CT may have emboldened folks in our traditional enemies' worlds to continue to develop and grow while we just weren't paying attention to it. Right. So the Russian bear never went away. It just went dormant for a little bit and came back, more vigorous than before. Yeah. And so what does that mean? And so what does engagement in Ukraine mean and those sorts of stuff?
Yeah. And of course, the same, like you just said, the same thing could be happening in the Middle East. Obviously, we've in our minds, 2017, we got rid of ISIS and Mosul, but again, they could go dormant. It's the whole what's happening right now.
Exactly, and understanding why those things developed, what's changed in the interim, and what happens next.
Yeah,
There was, you can't use the phrase anymore, but they called him an Orientalist, Bernard Lewis.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I think he had a saying, I'll butcher it incorrectly, but he said, if you want to change the Middle East, he goes, you have to work with the women in the Middle East, because
100%.
He said the women are wives to half the Middle East and mothers to the rest.
Well, yeah.
And it's like, there's nobody else that has the influence or the potential influence of women. And so thinking about, what are the problems that you could solve that prevent that thing that rose 25 years ago from rising again?
Yeah, that's a super interesting take too. And I think that's something that we saw on the U.S. side, obviously, toward the latter half of the GWAT, when we started introducing the women into these teams.
CSTs.
That were doing exactly.
Right.
Yeah, we started, and the amount of information and the amount of headway that we were making with just women engaging with the women. And I mean, you see that on every side. Who was, I always forget her name, the Russian spy that was over here.
Anna.
Yes. I forget her name. We'll have to look it up. You might have to look it up. I forget what her moniker was. It was like Black Widow or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. And just like super good looking girl. And
yeah, I mean, she was a deployment 8, but.
Okay. Yeah. All right. But at the time, just
I'll get canceled for saying that.
Yeah. Well, no. So we've said much worse.
Yeah.
But super interesting.
Anna Chapman.
Yes, Anna Chapman. That's right. I think she was a Breitling wearer, perhaps. But apparently, sketchy people wear Breitlings.
Sketchy people wear Breitlings. Yeah. I mean, she was completely inefficient at the intelligence collection side. She was so new in it.
She's good at the other collection side, for sure. Yes.
But that whole thing was interesting because it woke people up to the fact that we had these people that were actively working against us and were willing to spend a lot of money over long periods of time. Some of those people had been inserted as illegals into Canada and then immigrated to the U.S. as Canadians.
Right.
All set up by the Russians, by the KGB before the fall of the wall.
Yeah.
So some of these programs, long predated, Russia and were part of Soviet Union programs that never went away.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that the general person in this country doesn't understand is the willingness to play the long game by all of these other countries.
Correct.
Like you look at China, which is a multi-thousand-year dynasty. And I mean, we see it with, there's so many theories, and it could be tinfoil hat of me to think, but speaking to some correspondents within Mexico, and you see the Chinese laboratories showing the cartels here, we're going to teach you how to cook the gnarliest fent that's ever been cooked.
Yep.
We know geographically how to color code it, and we'll have, like, you push it. Is it tinfoil hat to think like, oh, China knows that the U.S. has a drug problem, and maybe if we can push all of this super potent stuff, maybe a percentage of the U.S. kills itself off? Like,
I don't think it's tinfoil hat at all. I mean, America thinks in business quarters, right? 3-month increments, because that's what everybody measures the success of business on. They think in football and baseball seasons, right? So the season's over. What am I going to do?
Right.
And then they think in a year's time frame.
Right.
Very rarely do people think in America much beyond a 12-month time frame in terms of planning or figuring out what they're going to do. And so, whereas I think China and Russia think generationally, right? And it's just not in our culture to think that way. No. Now, we've got a lot of things in our culture that they don't have that help us offset some of that, but it's definitely a gap in our thinking. And so you need to, when you find those people that are willing to look beyond that, and I don't think they're tinfoil hat wearers. I think they won't get it right all the time.
Right.
But that's the cost of still having people look forward and making educated guesses over just living where we are in a day-to-day, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, and living existence.
Yeah, an example of it that I heard recently I've got a friend who's in cybersecurity, and granted, I don't know what company it was or who the guy was, but he was basically explaining he was at a conference and they were explaining this scenario with a certain company where a gentleman he was pretty high up in the company, another cybersecurity company that was writing code for these things, and had a neighbor that moved in, whatever. They became friends, became best friends. The guy was there when this gentleman's, like the neighbor was there when the gentleman's baby was born. Like they watched the kids, like they were best friends. One day, guy goes into his home office and his laptop's not there. He doesn't know where it went. Turns out his buddy, who's been his buddy for 12 years or 13, 14 years, was an agent of another, like a near peer state, and was running the long game, was assigned to someone at this company, and with the objective of getting information or however they can. That's why, again, you say like, we don't think generationally. And I think that's such a huge, I mean, we see it with everything from that as far as like InfoSec.
Yep.
And also even down to like, pollution or like
climate issues.
Yeah, people just aren't thinking about the next generation. They're like, oh, well, my kid will have a great life. Well, maybe not. But I think the info security thing, especially now in a time where, I mean, we're able to see. I mean, we are live streaming a war right now.
Right.
Like we can watch a war.
FPV drone footage and like it's wild.
And I think honestly, like, and I'm so
not healthy.
No, I'm so technologically inept. I can barely plug a TV into a wall. So for me, I'm super interested in hearing about all these different things and how to be more secure as far as your information and your technology. But I can barely scratch the surface of it. And I think that that's something that is going to be super necessary. And I don't know if it's being proliferated in the way that it should. I think that the average American is probably the easiest target for a near peer entity. And I don't know how you change that. I don't really know how that becomes a thing other than this mass education. I don't know how you do that.
Well, or you give over more and more civil liberties to, some nameless, faceless, protective bureaucracy, which nope, that's a bad idea because that'll get used against us at some point.
Right. I'm interested too, and you don't have to answer if you don't want, but your time in the agency, did it jade you in any way, or did it give you more faith in our government and its ability, or did it give you are you more wary of our government? Like if the average person were to ask you, should I trust the government? Do you have a bureaucratic answer, or do you have I'm sure you have both, but.
Yeah. So it did both at the same time, right? There are incredible people, some of the smartest people in the world doing really, really good work in our government.
100%.
For selfless reasons. They could go make millions of dollars outside the government, doing easier work. There are also some of the just knobbiest, bureaucratic boneheads you've ever met also working in the government. And they'll never get fired from their jobs.
No, of course not.
Right? So
they'll only get promoted.
They'll only get promoted. And so there's a middle core that ends up cycling through because they can't stand the fact that those people never get flushed out, and they're not that superstar that stays for a season and then goes and rises to the golden towers fast. But what time in the government did was it taught me that most conspiracy theories are bullshit because it's impossible to keep a secret.
Yeah, 100%.
It just really is.
Agree.
I look at it and I go, no, I've seen the people that you're talking about that would do the conspiracies, and they're just not capable
of
either that thing or that level of secrecy over that much time.
Man.
However, do I think there are people in the government or tangential to the government that wish that they could do those things?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And given the opportunity, would they? 100%. Because they believe they know better.
Yeah.
So those people I do not trust.
Of course, yeah. And that's human nature.
Right.
Like there's always going to be that.
But the person that's out there trying to, collect intelligence on, Russia as it's, fighting Ukraine, or the person that's trying to stop Al Qaeda from, blowing up a school bus in, Central Africa. Yeah.
Right.
Those people, I want all the support in the world.
Absolutely.
For them.
Yeah. And I think, as I've gotten older, I think I have a more jaded view toward big government in general. And
yes.
And that's just, it is what it is. But at the same time, and it's the same thing. And I've probably heard like Rogan say it years ago or something. And it was like, it might've been it was probably when Trump got elected or something. And it's like, I understand being both sides, whether it be Trump or Biden or whoever. I understand your side, humans are innately tribal. And I understand hating one side or the other, but it's like either way, regardless of who's in charge, that's the pilot of our ship.
Right.
Like
100%.
And I don't want the pilot of our ship to have a heart attack.
Right.
Because then I go down too. So at the end of the day, maybe it's not that person that I want to do the best, but I want the government in and of itself to be able to do the best. And that doesn't necessarily mean I trust the government.
Right.
But it's like, I hope you're doing all right.
As I've gotten older, I've become probably more isolationist, right?
Yeah.
I definitely have become more in favor of smaller government over larger. I want them to make better fiscal decisions. I look at the amount of money we're spending on certain things overseas, and I look at our cutting funding for VA-related things, and I go, man, this is like we're spending our money in the wrong places
of course,
on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But also like people are protecting their gravy trains. There's, so I'm anti-lobbyists generally.
Yeah.
I'm anti-career politicians.
100%.
Right. But I think you want to encourage the best and brightest people you can to go into governments to serve for a period of time and then go out and do other things as well. I don't think you want to create a career class of bureaucrats. That's where the problem comes, because then they begin focused on self-preservation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a slippery slope, especially and I think everyone assumes, like you've seen our team. Our team's pretty young here.
Yeah.
We're a gun company, and we're not a standard gun company. Everywhere we go, we definitely stick out. If you're in a gun shop, our guns stick out. But even just interpersonal relationships, you meet people, and you go, "Oh, what do you do?" I work in the firearms industry. And now this current. Actually, I've started to see a shift recently, but for a long time, it's like you couldn't even say that because you're this or you're that, and that weird just like it's just completely polarized where you're either this or you're that. There is no in between, and I think it's shifting a little bit. I think people are kind of getting sick of it being that way, but yeah, having worked for the government in a different capacity and just seeing, I mean, anyone that's been in the military is like this. It's a running joke that like, well, we could do it this way and be efficient, or we could do the absolute, if you had a fifth grader come up with the worst possible way we could do something, that's how the government's going to do it.
Right.
And that's just how we do it. So I was curious. I'm bummed about the conspiracy theory thing.
I understand.
Super bummed about that.
And there are people in my former world that disagree with me, but.
Well, I mean, there are things that make it hard when, we get things that are declassified like Operation Northwoods.
Sure.
Because that in and of itself is pretty, like that, if you were to tell someone, they're like, you're a conspiracy theorist. And then it gets declassified. Part of maybe there's a conspiracy that it's a dog whistle or it's a
propaganda piece.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? But do I think we went to the moon in '69? No, I don't. But you're kind of crushing my dreams, but we'll see.
I mean, I've talked to friends who stepped on the moon.
I believe we've been there. I believe we've been there. I just don't know if that was the year, That's all right.
Well, we're going back.
Yeah. But in no, I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not going to do that. I can't do this. We're going to go down a wormhole or a rabbit hole, whatever. A space wormhole. Wormhole would be cool.
No, it's interesting. I do think attitudes are changing towards some stuff. I think people are. I think generally most Americans want to be able to trust their government. They also want to be left alone to live their lives, and go about their daily existence with as little interference as possible.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that hurts that model is that there are people that want to scream really loudly at one another and have gained control over the arguments. And they've gained control over the arguments by gaining control over the language of arguments, right? Mm-hmm. And really, if you want to win the argument, you've got to own the language. So when people talk about assault weapons or when people talk about some of the other, hot button issues like abortion, there's certain language that drives, emotional response to people and stops people from thinking rationally. And they don't recognize that the language is what's controlled that.
Right.
And so whether you want to talk about black guns or assault weapons or, most people, they agree nobody should be using guns to kill kids in schools. Yeah. Like there's nobody that disagrees with that.
100%. There's no gun guy that's like, we should be shooting kids.
Right. So let's talk about the people though that are doing it.
Right.
Right. Even, I read a Wall Street Journal article this week on the overturn of the bump stock ban from the Trump thing. Yep. And as I read through the article, I was reading how the journalists used their language to skew a position and talking about makes the firearm fire, blah, 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 et cetera, with increased lethality.
Right.
I'm like, look, can we talk about that? Because that's not a real thing. There's there's lethal or not lethal. There's not increased lethality.
Yeah. Can you be more lethal?
Right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's the person right? It's not necessarily that thing. So, but you start down that path, and because at some level that the language of argument has already been taken from us, right? You want to talk to people about what the definition of an assault weapon is because they're wrong. You've lost already.
Right. 100%.
Even though they're wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think humans are creatures of, we take the path of least resistance, and this is my 9th year in the gun industry, and I've always been, I mean, I live in the stats and I love the statistics, and because it's always good to, I never aim to argue with anyone, especially over an issue where children were killed. Like it's not an argument. I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong because of this, but I think education is so important, and having, empirical evidence is pretty important in educating someone. And as time has gone on, I think to me, the whole gun thing, in my eyes, it looks like just taking the path of least resistance. It's hard to talk about. Every mass shooter, for the most part, has been on SSRIs at some point, like another Band-Aid for a bigger problem. Like, it's hard to figure out how do we fix people when it's easy to just say, oh, we'll just take the tool away. But how do you fix the person? No one has an answer for that, and it's hard, and it takes time, and it seems like not many people are willing to do the work. And so it's hard to fix that issue. And I think that everything to do with, take this gun away and take that gun away, it's a Band-Aid. And honestly, I'm more surprised at people's not inability, but just their lack of desire to educate themselves at all. Like, you can live in you could never have thought about a gun in your life. You see a shooting on the news, and someone says, "Oh, common sense gun laws. We could take this, and this away." And to you, or to most people, again, takes time and effort to educate yourself. But they go, "Oh yeah, I guess that does make sense." Whatever. But if they took the 3 minutes to look up statistics, or if they took 20 minutes to read about X, Y, or Z, they would very quickly realize, like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. That's not going to fix anything. And I think I don't know if it's a generational thing, or it doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I'd say I don't think it's a generational thing per se. I think it's an intellectual laziness is part of it.
Yeah.
But I also think it's emotional arguments are easy. They're sticky arguments, and factually based arguments are less sticky.
Yeah.
How many people do you know vote the way their parents voted? Most.
Yeah, I would say a ton.
Most people vote the way that their parents have voted.
Yeah.
And because they don't have to think about it. They just
right. I was going to say, they don't even have a political opinion.
They go pull red or blue if they pull.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things that I spend too much time thinking about.
No.
Because I'm not going to change anything about it. But I think that's another thing where people, we've been taught our whole lives, like, an individual can make a change. I don't think that. I think an individual can spark some thought, but me, myself, I'm not going to change the world. But one thing I'm curious about, and I'm interested to hear, maybe you have an answer that I haven't heard before, just through world experience, and it goes, there's something to do with this generation, like post World War II. A lot of people would say America's in its prime. We're very industrial. You have the nuclear family after World War II and all that. There was this sense of integrity, I think. And there was, like, we all know, this is going way left. We all know pedophilia is bad.
Or way right.
Yeah, or way right, yeah. So I'm just curious because I heard someone recently I think they were like an integrity hacker or something like that, explaining that the country, our country, the U.S., is the number one consumer of crimes against children.
Okay.
At least online. And I'm so curious, and I don't know if it's related to this kind of, obviously the mental health things going on with the shootings, mass shootings, where something happened along the line. I'm going to say it was your agency
right.
Something happened along the line.
When we started selling crack in Los Angeles.
Exactly. That's right. Maybe it was MK Ultra that changed. No, but somewhere along the line, something snapped, and we went from this country that seemed full of integrity and were always pushing to be the good guys. Mm-hmm. Where did we go? Where did we change to now we're every day we're seeing a new person in power being arrested for crimes against children, normally in a sexual manner. But like, not only do you have that change where now we're the number one consumer of crimes against children or child sexual material, but also you have all these school shootings. Like in that same time period, the 40s, 50s, like I remember my grandparents telling me, my grandfather would say they would all bring their shotguns to school, break them down, put them in their lockers, and then they would go shoot birds with their teachers after school. Guns were not regulated. You could have your child go to the hardware store and buy you a gun and bring it back. And we weren't seeing these mass shootings. We weren't seeing any of that. So what happened? And a lot of people, it's kind of a theme in the new era of gun world to like kind of stand Ted Kaczynski, which is wild because not a good dude at all.
Right.
The stuff he said about technology, great. I agree. That's cool. Like it's interesting. Other stuff, not super good. Not the greatest guy in the world. But that seems to be the easiest thing to blame it on, is that technology. And I don't know. Is there any time, like through your career, did you see a change, I guess, in like zeitgeist in general? Because as technology came in, did you see a change in human behavior? Because I think you were in a position where you're focused on human behavior a lot more than the average person.
I guess the way I put it is, have you ever built a house or built a barn or a shed or anything like that?
You've been part of it. Yeah.
So, if you want to have your wall straight, you use a plumb line. Mm-hmm. I think what we are seeing is we have, I guess, too many different plumb lines get brought forth, and you can, like a plumb line's a plumb line, is period.
Right.
So what I would ask is a question, which is, has our plumb line changed over the last, 80 years? What was our plumb line 80 years ago that got, 20-year-old men to leave their farms in Iowa and get on ships and storm the beaches at Normandy?
And not come home until the war's over.
And not come home for 4 years. Or in that case, 2 years or whatever. But what caused them to go do that? What's changed in the plumb line? Because the plumb line is what keeps you level, or keeps you, straight. And, so has technology skewed the plumb line? Perhaps. Is it the voices that are being heard over technology? Right? Is it people say, no, your plumb line is your plumb line. There is no true plumb line.
Yeah.
So what happens if everybody? Well, okay. So you guys build guns.
Yep.
Right. You got torque specs.
That's right.
So your wrenches have to be calibrated because somebody calibrates that 35, foot-pounds is 35 foot-pounds.
Yeah.
Because if you think it's 35, but it's actually 15. You can have problems. So somebody has to ensure that 35 is 35.
Right. They're creating that plumb line.
They're creating that true thing for that.
The control.
And so if everybody has their own ability to determine what 35 foot-pounds is, what's that going to do for the quality control of your product set?
Yeah, it's going to be a mess.
All right. So then take that a little bit, a silly analogy, and say, if everybody gets to determine what's right or wrong and apply it to a national scope,
yeah, there is no true right or wrong.
There is no true right or wrong, so there's no plumb line. And so does that throw the nation's moral compass out of whack?
Yeah.
I'd suggest yes.
We're fucked.
So what do you do? Like, I don't know what you do other than you try and come back to the things that are true.
Right.
And the problem with that is right now is there's economic incentives to people going, no, that's not true, because they benefit economically if multiple things are not true or multiple things are true.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy.
So that's what I think from my observation and looking at it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think what you said is very easy to understand. And I think a lot of people will agree with that. It makes a lot of sense.
Approach it from a personal faith-based perspective. I think that's an impact of it, but that's not all of it for sure. And people are going to come at it from different approaches, but I do think at the end of the day, if you can't agree on, collectively what is the plumb line, right? And then do plumb lines change? Does 35 foot-pounds change? Right. And everybody
in real life, no.
And everybody says that we are a different nation now. We shouldn't interpret the Constitution through the founder's intent. We need to apply a current version of it. Well, do we?
No.
But I think
there's a guideline,
but I think that's the core of the argument.
Yeah.
Right?
No, absolutely. I mean, we hear it even with 2A supporters.
Correct.
That are like, well, we should, they were only talking about X, Y, and Z. And it's like,
dude, they were private business people that owned privateers.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They had artillery.
Yeah.
No, I mean, some of the privateers had better weaponry than the U.S. Navy did.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. And I think that you bring up a good point for sure. And it's nice because we all live in our own little echo chambers always. Yeah. And I think it's important for people to get outside perspective, whether you agree with it or not. That's another thing I think people are afraid of. Confirmation bias is huge. So
absolutely.
People don't want to hear things they don't agree with. And I think a lot of people are afraid to change their mind on things, which our buddy Kevin Brittingham was not here. We'll tell you he reserves the right to change his mind at all times.
Yes.
And he sings that true. I guess for the viewer do you have any stories that you can share that were either super exciting moments in your career or hairy moments, or is there anything that when you think if a random person were to ask you or a student at the college were to say, tell me something about your career. What's it like? What's the agency like? Like what's your most James Bond?
It's pretty funny. So in reality, if guns are going off, you've done something really bad.
Yeah, things went wrong.
Things went really, really bad. I only carried a gun in one of my 3 tours because that was the only high threat post that I was in. And most people associate that excitement or that engagement with that. But I can think of some times where things were incredibly exciting because of the human drama that was taking place to convince somebody to literally put their life in your hands because they're going to give you the keys to the kingdom. That's high drama right there, but it doesn't necessarily play good on TV.
Right. Yeah. Not so glamorous.
The story I like to tell people was after my wife and I got married, we didn't take a honeymoon, but we were living overseas in a nation that had fairly good access to tropical beaches, but also had a fairly active counterinsurgency program going on there. And so we had some friends that loaned us a beach house of theirs for a long weekend. So we went to this beach house. And as we were on our way to the beach house, we're driving on this jungle track, and it was just us. We didn't have counter surveillance with us or anybody. And we come around this bend on the road in the jungle. In front of us are basically a rifle squad of sketchy looking dudes in woodland pants, flip flops, and tank tops and AKs.
Perfect.
And so I stop about 60 meters from them as we came around, and I look at my wife and I said, "Look, I have no idea who these guys are, but they're not supposed to be here."
Yeah.
And I had my Browning High Power with 2 magazines.
Sick one.
And I had my Chief Special, which was my backup gun.
Sick one.
And so I hand her the Chief Special, and I said, and we couldn't back up because of the way that the muddy jungle road, like we're stuck.
Yeah, it's forward or nowhere.
Forward or nowhere. The only way through is through, which has become one of my teaching points with my kids and stuff. Like oftentimes when difficult times happen, the only way through is through. So we start to pull forward, and I can see these guys looking at us, and they're all just holding their rifles kind of loosely at port arms or whatever. And then all of a sudden, one of them looks at us and sees 2 white faces inside the car, and they get big grins on their faces, and they start smiling and waving at us. And they were the local militia. Oh. They were guys out looking for these insurgents.
Okay.
So we're like, okay. Adrenaline level starts to drop again.
Yeah.
We go on, we get to the beach house, which is only maybe 3 miles from this location with them. Get up the next day, go to the beach early, and it's like there's deserted. There's nobody around. And so there was a windsurfer at this beach house. So I'm like, okay, I surf. I'm going to try a windsurfer. Like, that's cool, right?
Same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. So I jump on it, and there's pretty good, wind heading offshore. And so I'm tooling around. My wife's laying out on the beach, and there's literally not a soul around. And all of a sudden, I hear from behind her, grenades going off, firefight taking place on the backside of the hill that's behind where we are. And so I'm like, okay, my wife's on the beach. I'm about 150 meters offshore on a windsurfer with an offshore wind. Yeah. Like, how do I get back? And I'm like laying down on the board and trying to paddle and swim back as I just crawl up on the beach exhausted as the firefight, which was short, like they, often are, ends. And I'm just collapsing on the beach, and she's sitting upright, and she's got my Browning high power in her hands, not sure what she was gonna be able to do with it because she hadn't gone through weapons qual or anything like that.
Point it at least.
Yeah. And I'm literally crawling out of the water, not like James Bond, ready to, save the world, but just dying of exhaustion as, it just dissipates in the distance. And it was, as it later turned out, it was an interaction between those militia forces that we'd seen the day before and the insurgents. And they were actually like 3 clicks away behind the hill, and it was fine.
Yeah.
But that was definitely a hair-raising moment, and we'd only been in country for 4 or 5 months. We're like, okay, this is and we'd only been married a month.
Yeah,
like what did I just drag my wife into in this world? So
it's so wild that we don't. I mean, because we don't. Well, I say we don't experience it. We don't. We live in a pretty rural area. Maybe the inner city is a little different, Chicago and Jacksonville and whatever. But like, that's everyday life. And I was just in Iraq last year, and it's a lot more tame now. But it's like that firefights in the distance are nothing. It's like hearing taxi cabs honk a horn. Like, it's so wild to me, the difference between and that's another. There's so many, I guess right now, there's so many negatives that people see about the country, but it's like, I promise you, there are no firefights going on, at least here. I'm sure there are elsewhere, but yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of her intro to this world as well. And we didn't tell her parents that story for a long time.
Yeah. And she was already working her way through the agency
Not yet.
At the time?
No. Okay. She had literally, we'd just gotten married a month before and moved overseas. So she was trying to figure out, what to do.
What's going on? Yeah. Do you think any part of that excited her to be like, I want to do this too?
No, that wasn't, that was never her thing. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I don't have any exciting stories like that, really. I mean, we got shot at in Arizona, but not on purpose, I don't think.
Yeah, that was a little different.
Yeah. Hair raising though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, when you hear it whistle.
Yeah, and snap over your head.
And it's close, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. It'll get your attention.
Yeah, and it always, I mean, that's another thing. We talked about it a little bit, but it's like we go to these events, these public shooting events all the time. And anyone that's worked for a company that has done so can tell you, like, I know for a fact, I'm not worried about getting shot in the streets. Like, because I don't do that. I don't got beef like that.
Yeah.
I probably, if I'm ever going to get shot.
And you don't go places like that either.
Right.
Generally.
Yeah. But if I have a feeling, like, if I were to ever get shot, it's going to be at a public range. Like, I've seen people shoot rounds through the tent that they're standing under, just everything you can think of. Like and depending on where we are too, like you'll set up targets they'll tell you, hey, don't shoot these targets that are right there. Shoot the ones that are far away. And you start getting hit in the face with jackets and stuff like that. And like, it's so crazy. My dad actually asked me, he's like, do you guys wear vests when you go there? And I was like, first of all, you gotta be willing to, or you got to be fighting someone who's good enough to shoot you in a vest. And secondly, if I'm going to get shot at a public range, it's probably going to be in the face.
Right.
Like, that vest is not going to do anything for me. But yeah, it's crazy.
If you haven't been hit with, a jacket or something like that, then you really haven't spent much time on ranges anyway.
Yeah.
If you're a bird hunter and you haven't been peppered by, somebody.
You've never been with Dick Cheney.
You're right.
Yeah. That was awesome. I was going to say, I've seen photos of you with HW. Were you around during that time period, the whole Dick Cheney shooting people in the face? And
yeah.
Awesome. Very cool.
So, I obviously didn't spend any time with Cheney, but yeah.
I can tell you don't. Yeah.
I had no pockmarks on my face.
Exactly. I can tell. Yeah.
Cool. As a quail hunter growing up in Texas, though, we all understood how that happened.
Yeah. I can see it, right? Like, just thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, it'd be easy.
Yeah. And, sitting in a duck blind with your buddy 100 yards away, you're like, okay, he's going to feel this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. You watch the pepper spray.
Yeah. That's another person that I was thinking on your profile. I saw you with HW and interesting career too. That was cool. Is that something you guys kind of bonded over?
He's an interesting guy. Obviously, I mean, brilliant thinker.
Yeah.
Right.
I've met him a few times when he was up here in Kenny. I worked on a sailboat that he frequented.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So it was cool to meet him. But yeah, I mean, I don't like pre-presidency. I was so young. I didn't know much of his life until you look into it, whatever. But I'd imagine crazy cool career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, there's a lot yet to be learned. Even I think about all the stuff that he did.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is that your next mission? Is put out HW's history?
No, I want to, actually want to, there's a piece I want to write about. So I was talking with Watches of Espionage, and for the record, I am not Watches of Espionage.
I was going to say, I knew that, but people have asked me, they're like, is that the same guy?
I get that, and I know him, and I'm not him. He's doing great work.
Did you know him before Watches of Espionage?
I did not. No, we are so oftentimes in our world, your whether you overlap with somebody depends on areas of the world you served in. And so our areas of the world did not overlap typically, although we have a bunch of mutuals.
Of course,
so, which is kind of how we test each other's bona fides. Like, if you don't know this person or that person, within 5 minutes, you're like, yeah, this guy's a poser.
Yeah.
But so I did not know him there, but we've connected since then, and I'm not him.
Yeah.
But he recently came out with a blade called the Mosby.
Okay.
And I worked for the guy that he named that blade after, and nobody's really done a good profile of him. And his name was William Mosby. He was called Buana.
South African.
For Africa, for his work in Africa. At one point in time, he was called the most dangerous man in Africa.
Sick.
And so I think I'd like to write a profile for FE on Buana.
Yeah, that'd be super cool.
So I'm trying to see if his family will talk to me about some of that stuff, because I want to write it at a more in-depth level.
Right.
But he was a big hunter. He hunted all over Africa. He chased some of the hardest targets in the world as a CIA officer. He was special forces before he went into the CIA. Like there's a story to be told there. So that'd be what I want to work on next.
Yeah. Is there any this might crush people if you can even talk about it. I hear about Billy Waugh all the time.
I worked with Billy.
Did you?
Yeah.
I believe what he says or said.
Okay. Which parts?
Most of it.
I mean, if you are, if you're in that world, you get good at telling tall tales.
For sure.
Right?
There's some stories from Vietnam that I was like, I don't know.
Okay.
But
so when I worked with Billy, got to figure out what I can say. When I worked with Billy, I worked in a country that I can't say.
Right.
And I had no idea who he was. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how many Silver Stars he'd won. I just knew him as this voice on the radio.
Yeah.
For 2 years.
Yeah.
And I absolutely know he got me home alive one night. A night when I not because there was some threat to me out there, but because I got really, really sick. And I was hallucinating at 104.5, 105 fever.
It's that MK Ultra.
I was driving through a typhoon rainstorm, and he literally navigated me home corner by corner.
That's awesome.
From an operation that I'd aborted because I realized I just couldn't do it. I couldn't make it. I was too sick. No doubt in my mind, he got me home safe that night.
That's awesome. That's cool.
But I didn't know who he was then.
Yeah.
Like I knew him by his call sign.
Yeah, he's the guy. Yeah, he's a
and it wasn't until much later that this kind of grandfatherly looking dude would then go on back into Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah.
At age
70s?
72, I think, was when he first went in, and he was in and out of Afghanistan until he was 80.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like just nuts.
Yeah, we've had a guest on. I think it was John McPhee, Sheriff of Baghdad.
Yeah. Shrek.
Yeah. He'll be back actually in August. He'll be up here. And I want to say it's either him or another guy we had from the Army side that like rode around with Billy for a little bit. And same thing, just like he was an animal.
He was.
Animal. And this was when he was in his 70s
but
too.
But also like a nice guy.
Yeah, I believe it for sure.
Like just interesting. So there's an artist on Instagram, Prairie Fire, who does some great work, and he did a portrait of Billy, and then got Billy to sign it for me, which awesome. Before he passed away. So I'm really
that's super cool.
Grateful for that. But he was a good guy to work with, who is an absolute hero for our nation.
For sure.
And do I believe that he actually had bin Laden through the rifle scope in Khartoum? Yep. 100% believe he did. And do I believe he was told not to do that in 1997? Yep.
Yeah.
Or whatever he says in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah.
His book, Hunting the Jackal, is worth
Oh, 100%. Even for because like when I say like there's some stuff from Vietnam, like it's just the theatrical speak of him being all shot up in a hole. And it's like, well, how shot up were you, brother? But obviously enough. But yeah.
I mean, he did get shot up a lot.
100%.
And he did do some, nighttime halo insertions
Yeah. The Jason Bourne stuff.
Yes.
The Billy Waugh stuff.
The Billy Waugh stuff.
For sure.
So one day somebody should really do his story justice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think kind of something we can taper off toward the end, but for those that listen, because we spoke about not a mutual. I don't want to say mutual contact because I don't think we're real pals with the dude, but someone we both know that maybe isn't. He's very loud and proud about certain things, and maybe isn't the most qualified person to speak on what they're speaking on or whatever. I think that's something that a lot of the viewers get lost in is. Granted, Live, Cure, or Die, or the Live, Cure, or Die podcast, we have only brought hitters. We brought the John McPhee's. We've brought other names.
I appreciate you bringing a backbencher up.
That's yeah, exactly, yeah. So, no, you're a hitter too. We've not brought on Rob O'Neill and those dudes. Do you have a general, for the average person, without being able to just verify, do you have a general kind of rule of thumb on, because I don't know, and you're not the SEAL team, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that are, I was in the CIA or whatever. Obviously everyone was a SEAL. All the Stolen Valor guys were SEALs. But do you have a general rule of thumb for people that when they hear someone all loud and proud, are like, I don't know if I should believe this guy?
Well, I have SEAL quality hair.
Absolutely.
Say that.
And writing. Right. Granted, they don't write their books. They have someone else.
Somebody else does it. But yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So no CIA officer knows everything about everything.
Of course.
So for me, if I were to talk to somebody and say, use your discernment and listening to what people are saying. If you see somebody out there that's an expert on kind of everything, then I would ask them, how are they maintaining that expertise? Because we tend to be generalists, yes, but then develop specific foci along the way, right? So, somebody who was a CT specialist, why are they talking about Ukraine? Or why are they talking about, like, if you have a CIA officer who's talking about a shooting in that's a domestic violence that's gone into an active shooter situation in California, but why?
Yeah.
So I'd encourage folks to use discernment on that sort of stuff. Most CIA officers that did what I did were undercover, and then have had to go through a process of having that cover rolled back so that they can be overt. And and so just there are ways you can kind of assess, is this person legitimately who they say they are? What's difficult to assess is, did they do anything of any note or import?
Yeah.
And that may not matter. Like, I think of some folks that have gone out there and they just were journeyman officers who worked really hard for 20 years. They know the job. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Are they necessarily going to be the best spokesperson on, XYZ news channel? Maybe not. Those are different skill sets.
Right. And that's something that might be lost on people too, is like everyone assumes CIA is, like you said, the two job sets, but like there are secretaries at the agency, there are janitors,
there are travel agents, there are doctors, there are psychologists, there are computer scientists, there are inventors. Like there's no job that you can really imagine. There's teachers,
right? There's
language teachers. There's STEM teachers. So there's jobs for anybody that wants to go down that path. So it's understanding to the extent that you can, what does their background say about them, and then what do they stay in their lane?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, are they willing to say, I don't have any experience with that. I don't know.
That's not my area.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So and also stay in their lane. So there's a bunch of guys that I worked with that did full 30-year careers in the agency. And, if somebody wanted to talk about what is it like to run, a major CT program in Afghanistan, don't talk to me about that. I didn't run one.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to profess expertise in that. Am I going to talk about what is it like to do a one-on-one recruitment? Sure, I can do that. And so can they. Yeah. So it's just making sure that, you listen to the person with discernment for what is it that they're talking about, what's their experience base, connect them to. And that works for the SEALs, it works for CAG, it works for, whoever it is you're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good rule of thumb. I mean, people want to believe, I think, inherently. Like you hear these dudes that have, because there's so many people who have done so many amazing things for real. And I think people want to believe. And I just, especially within the last couple of years, I see so many people getting duped by people, and they would have no way to know.
Right.
They would have no way to vouch, but just based on who we surround ourselves with and people that we work with or organizations or whatever, you find out, oh, I guess that sucks. Like,
right.
And
it's disappointing. It is a bummer.
It's a super bummer.
It's super easy with the SEALs because there's a database.
Right.
Like that makes it easy.
Yeah.
Like everybody that tried buds
right.
is in the database with did they pass?
Yeah, pass or not.
Did they get through SQT?
Yeah.
Did they And so that makes it easy. The rest of the schoolhouses don't have that same database, so it's harder. Man. And we definitely don't, because that would be a dangerous
defeat
database.
the purpose. Yeah, absolutely. No.
Cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, we'll have to get you back with Kevin in here too. I'm sure he's going to have probably some I don't know how it is, offensive questions.
I'm sure he's going to be disappointed about the lack of my belief in conspiracy theories too.
He might. He's actually he's kind of like he's pretty grounded. It's kind of weird. Yeah. I want him to be more into conspiracy theories, and I don't think he really is.
No, not much interest.
Yeah. He's into wrestling in the 80s, and that's about it. He thinks that's all real.
So, it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nacho Libre is a true story.
Yeah. It's a good documentary.
Yeah, some of your listeners will probably go, "Oh, he's a shill for the CIA." Yeah, this is blah blah blah.
Well, and
and that's okay.
We work with so many organizations and people that have to kind of they can talk about X, Y, or Z, and there are probably people that are going to be like, "Well, you didn't even ask them about this op or that op," and it's like, that's not my place.
Yeah,
you're free to talk about whatever you want to, and so we're not going to push you, but I think it'll be good have you come back and have Kevin on, ask you some crazy questions. He'll ask you all sorts of crazy stuff.
Well, I'll leave you with this, that whether it's the CIA or, the government in general, organizations are not people, but they're made up of people.
100%.
The organization is typically morally neutral, but the people can make good or bad decisions. And so when it comes to that question of, I think our government's in our best interest or not, I want the best people we can have, because we're stuck with the institution as long as we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
So, get those folks go doing it so that the people are making the best decisions in this, what is arguably a morally neutral organization. Yeah. Doesn't have a brain of its own.
Nope, just the collective brains of.
Yep. So we want the best we can get there.
Absolutely.
Cool, man.
For people that are listening, for your courses, this will come out in a few weeks or whatever. So obviously it's probably late. It's definitely late for this past year, but are people that obviously you have to enroll in UNH to take your courses? Yeah.
So it's interesting. I have, for the first time ever, I have two people that are auditing the course who are not UNH students that actually are folks from Instagram.
Okay.
That are going to audit one class. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm excited about that. The rest of my students are typically UNH Durham or UNH Manchester students. I do know that there are people that can take classes through the UNH system from other schools. I just don't know the mechanics of that. But yeah, I'll be teaching a course on covert action this fall. And then in the spring, I'll teach issues in intelligence collection, which is kind of a survey that explains what's HUMINT, what's SIGINT, what's OSINT, and why do they matter. And we walk through some case studies and stuff like that.
Cool. Awesome. So any of our listeners that are in the area or are able to enroll in UNH classes, they can sign up for your course. And
we got a whole bunch of other courses in the intelligence studies program there. So we got a grant from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence about 2 years ago. It's a $10 million grant over 10 years to create an intelligence center of academic excellence. They want us to help, create a feeder into the intelligence community, because we need the best we can get.
Of course. Awesome. Yeah. So go
Very
sign
cool.
up.
Yeah. Come on.
Well, let's enroll, dude. Let's go back to school.
Use your VA benefits.
I'm down for this one. This one sounds fun.
Yeah, why not?
I'm a hard grader.
I'd be screwed.
I ain't worried.
You got to write.
I'm a genius.
You got to write.
I'm certified.